Hi everyone, this is Rohit from Rise from Mastery, and today I'm excited to have Idriss Al Rifai, who's the CEO and founder of Flow 48, which provides a source of funding that is non-dilutive, doesn't require collateral or personal guarantees, and does not take months to obtain. Welcome to the show, Idriss.
Thanks a lot. Good to thanks for having me, Rohit.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, before the call, we talked about your journey. It's super interesting. You're born and brought up in France, and you're a pro basketball player and had a military experience. It's super interesting. How did your journey start, and what got you really interested in this crazy world of startups?
Wow, yeah. So it's been quite a few stories. So I think it feels like I've been a little bit like a cat, and I've had a few lives a little bit. So my first one is that, yeah, actually I played basketball. It was my passion, and then I turned out I was not too bad. So I played professional for Paris a couple of years, and
Oh,
then my dream was to go to the NBA, and then I actually failed 3 times to get there. Anyway, it was quite an intense experience, right? This is where a little bit where you understand where hard work is critical for you
yeah.
to get there, but also at some point talents beats also. We always tend to do the opposite, to say, yeah, talent is not enough if you don't have hard work.
Yeah.
But I also think that the opposite is true, right? If you really want to be to the top, I mean, I don't know on percentage standpoints, but on the top 0.1%, like talent is just. I remember, like, when I was playing, there were people that I'm like, yeah, this guy has more potential than I do, right? So it makes sense that he's playing and I'm not. So anyway, it gets you a little bit grounded, right? Because you realize that it doesn't matter sometimes how hard you try. And I think that's one of the takeaway from entrepreneurship, as well. You need to work hard. You need to, obviously, there is like a lot of prerequisites, but it's not a recipe, right? You still need luck. And I've done a few companies, and the difference between success and failure is just so close to each other. I know it sounds like a cliche, but it really is. So anyway, so yeah, I did that, and then I joined the special forces for a couple of years. I've been deployed in 14 countries. That was quite a fun experience.
Interesting. I mean, when it comes to professional sports, it's always difficult to get into the top league. Um, uh, and you made a very interesting analogy with entrepreneurship. But any do you think, like, you play team sports and then you've been an entrepreneur? Any similarities for somebody who does professional sports as well as entrepreneurship?
A lot. I think there is I mean, so for me, at least, and the way I see entrepreneurship, and I'm not pretending to have like the ultimate truth, but I think there is a level of dedication that is important. The fact to be, how to be structured, how to be dedicated in your efforts, making sure like delayed gratifications, all that stuff is present in sport. You don't see the results, like next day, right? You go to the gym, nothing changes. There was actually like a Simon Sinek. I was having like a chat about this, like you go to the gym, what happened the next day? Nothing. You go to the gym again, what happened the next day? Nothing. And it's all about this delayed gratification that you need to have in entrepreneurship, right? Because you get knocked out so many times, and you still need to believe that you're gonna have better days to help you, get up and fight again. So I think that's quite a lot. Two is definitely teamwork. Like I'm part of the team where, like and it was the same in the special forces actually, but I found that being a CEO of a startup is a little bit like being like the head of the team in a special force.
Okay.
And just the analogy goes as, like in the special forces, there is like everybody has his own specialty.
Yeah.
And you, as the officer, the only officer that is in the team, you're pretty much good at nothing, right? Except at making decisions and talking to people. But basically, the survival is under the others. So you make decisions, life or death decisions, based on the outputs, based on the inputs from other people that knows the job. But you still are the one making the calls, and you still are the one making decisions for the group. And I think that's a little bit, similar in a sense. Obviously, the stakes are not as high. It's not life or death. But in the company, you cannot be the best at everything. You need to hire people that are much better than you in the fields that they're in charge of, and you still need to make decisions that are life or death for the company.
Got it, got it. And after your stint with military, you went to do your MBA. You also got into consulting, and I've got a lot of huge respect for consultants. I was at OYO, I was reporting to a lot of BCG, McKinsey consultants. But do you
Yeah.
think a consulting experience, do you think it's quite important when you're trying to build something, or is it something which uh, which is not needed? You should just get your hands dirty and build from there.
My personal opinion, right, is that I think so. You're being a startup CEO is not only about building something, right? It's also about building the team and making sure that you have enough money so that you can grow the company, right?
Right.
And I know like fundraising is not everything, but if a CEO is bad at fundraising, the company, unless they have a product that is just like so superior, which is probably a tiny percentage of startups, that the company is going to die. So being able to fundraise is one of the critical things that we ask a CEO, because it's the only thing that he needs to do the best, compared to everyone else in the team. So I truly believe so. So in that sense, it's a skill set that you need, and for that, being a consultant before helps you. It's not only about deck writing and that kind of stuff, but I think it's two things that are critical. It's one, being able to be quick on your feet. I think in consulting, one of the things you learn is that you cannot be cornered. You need to be able to find an answer. I'm not saying bullshitting, because it's really it's a bad word, but really being able to gather some knowledge to provide some kind of insights on the questions and still add value, even if you don't have the answer. And I think if you put it positioned that way, it's quite different. And I think you learn that in consulting. And then two is story writing. I truly believe that a lot is about story, right? How you sell the story. The way you recruit somebody is how you sell the story. The way you raise money is how you sell the story. The way you sell is how you build the story, right? I remember it was probably one of my best class during my MBA. There was a entrepreneurial selling class, and it's probably my biggest takeaway. How storytelling and storytelling and story delivering is a very critical component. So in that sense, I would say that's important. And then two, I think, especially in emerging markets, a lot less true in the US, right? But in emerging markets, you get access. One of the issues that we have, for example, in the Middle East, where I did BCG, right? There is a lack of knowledge. There is not tons of information on some of this, and therefore being able to deep dive, through consulting for 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, sometimes 1 year on a topic, you become a real specialist, and you see all the gaps out there, and therefore gets you to there's a bit of an aha moment here, and you say, wow, there is a huge opportunity here. I really believe in it because I've been working on it for 1 year, and therefore you're more likely. And it's crazy because if you look at Southeast Asia, India to some extent, and definitely the Middle East, if you look at Karim and so on, if you look the first wave of companies, they're usually made by consultants. It's quite interesting. There is a high proportion. I think this proportion dies out as the maturity of the ecosystems goes higher. But yeah, I think it's a pattern that you see in multiple geographies, actually.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You rightly put it across. A lot of consultants did build, the high growth startups in Asia, and you founded Fletcher, which went on to become an end-to-end logistics solutions. How did that idea came into picture? Because it was really big in MENA. How did you go about finding the problem back there in Dubai and MENA?
Yeah, so basically it was coming from a simple so before. So I did a stint at the e-commerce website, right, just after BCG. Okay. And this is where I realized that there was something there was two things, actually. One is the fact that if you look at emerging markets, you're talking about 3 billion people pretty much, maybe even a bit more. And where the growth of e-commerce is actually coming from, right? Slightly, at least on percentage basis. Obviously, there is a base effect. But anyway, so where the growth is coming from is mostly emerging markets. Emerging markets do not have addresses. That's just a fact, right? You're talking about India, Pakistan to some extent, definitely the Middle East, all of Africa. The address system is not working, right? It's just a description of where you live. And I found that quite interesting that when you buy things online, you're still being asked for an address, even though half of the world population doesn't have one.
Right.
So even though 80% of transaction comes from mobile in emerging markets, so you have like these weird situations where everybody buys on mobile on e-commerce, but nobody has an address, and you see being asked an address. While when you order an Uber, right, nobody asks for where you live, right? Everybody, like, what matters is where you are when you want to use the service. So we try to match both of this and just like, okay, let me deliver you wherever you are, right? And therefore we went completely around the concept of address, delivering wherever you are. You could be at the beach and receiving a package and kind of stuff, right? So we managed to reduce return rate and delivery rate. In that sense, that was quite high, sometimes like double digits in some of these countries, sometimes even more, 20% in Egypt or so, just by solving this. And he became quite big. We had 6,000 employees. We're present in 6 countries. Yeah, it was a crazy ride for sure. And the ecosystem was not mature at all when we started. I'm not saying the first wave, because Souk and some of these companies were probably first wave, but definitely second wave with Karim and us.
Interesting. And you mentioned about Dubai and MENA. How's the ecosystem there in Middle East now? Looks like there's a lot of untapped opportunity, but where do you see the ecosystem going forward?
Yeah, definitely. Right. It's probably what the ecosystem has changed the most in the past 10 years. Look, like 10 years ago, I studied Fletcher, 12 years ago. There was probably 3-4 VCs in the region, right? And the rest was family offices and so on. You probably have 10 times as many VCs right now. So it completely blossomed, right, as an ecosystem. And this is great, right? We're back in the days, VC spending as a percentage of GDP was one of the lowest in the world. And now it's one of the highest. We completely leapfrog. The same way we leapfrog, by the way, women funded startup, actually, were actually higher than the Silicon Valley as a percentage. So some of these metrics were completely leapfrogged, and that's great. Yeah. So the ecosystem is a lot different than what it was, for sure.
Correct. And you went to Glovo, and then you started Flow 48.
Correct.
Are there a lack of lending alternatives there in Middle East? Is that what you feel?
Huge one. So SMEs, look at the UAE, for example, because we're operating in the UAE. SMEs typically represents 50 to 55% of GDP and only 6% of bank lending. Okay. So imagine that you have these massive discrepancies. You have basically half of the economy that cannot get funded, even though they're the ones that cannot get financed outside. So much so that even the central bank and EDB have start putting pressures on banks to be able to for them to actually deploy, because at the end of the day, this is what banks should be doing, right? Just injecting money into the economy to make sure that there is some, a multiplicator effect, right, in the economy, right? So, and they're not doing it because they're very uncomfortable, assessing the risk from SMEs. So there is no competitor from an RBF perspective, but there is no substitutes, right? So from an economic standpoint, which means that the closest products from an RBF is bank lending, and it's not even possible for 90% of the forget startups, of SMEs. We're not talking about startups here. We're talking about SMEs. Okay. So yeah, a huge gap, and that's what we're trying to solve.
Okay, and are you focusing on e-commerce and SaaS companies, or is it the SMEs in general?
SMEs in general, as long as they fit the financial criteria that we have in place. So we're industry agnostic, sector agnostic, but we're gonna get information from you, but also from multiple, data points. We have 7 data points, 7 source data points that get us different lights of the business, and then we speed up ratios, 17 ratios to be precise, out of which we decide, if it's in or not.
Got it. And when it comes to online companies, 50 to 80% of ad spends are getting into Facebook and Google ads. That is not sustainable. But why is that whatever money you put in, you're giving back to Google and Facebook, and what do you think could be the solution going forward?
Oh man, yeah, this is a very long question. But in a nutshell, look, we're unlike RBF companies. So obviously, what we're doing is RBF. 80% of our revenues come from RBF, but the RBF product is slightly different than what we have in the West. Again, because of the lack of substitutes. In the US and in Western Europe, you need to be completely embedded into the marketing suites of the SMEs because you're taking quasi-equity risk, right? You're financing anywhere between 30, 40, sometimes 50% plus of the target company revenues, which is a very RBF model in that sense that it's quasi-equity, and therefore, because you have complete visibility of the marketing suite and the acquisition suite, therefore you can make bets on companies you want to bet you want to bet on. We're slightly different, right? We're halfway between this and just a regular bank that is just like, SME bank that is just looking at the financial viability of the business and just providing some like loan facility that is like 3 to 6 months. So we're a little bit in between. And in that sense, we take a lot less risk. We're financing only a small percentage, like less than 10% of the target company's revenues. And therefore, we don't need to be as embedded into the marketing suites.
And if a company, an online company is building in the Middle East and in Dubai, what are the distribution channels should they focus on to build the business if they want to, stay away from ads or their really limited budget?
So for me, like if you look at like most of the businesses that I've built, I'm a big believer in partnerships and B2B2B partnerships.
Right.
And I think that's where, this is where, especially right now where CAC over LTV is a metric that is being like looked over by investors so much, rightfully so. I think we lost that North Star for a while, and it's great that we have it back. So I think B2B2B partnerships needs to be, is definitely a way to go. Especially in our field, right? There is quite a few companies that have actually been that have built a partnership, very strong partnerships from a deal acquisition perspective, and then have been acquired by them, be it ERP systems, be it payment gateways, and therefore, I think it's super critical to not only have that, being able to scale, but also have the right incentive on both sides to make the partnerships work.
Got it. Interesting. And what metrics are important for you to process loans to startup founders? How come you're able to process loans within 48 hours?
Yeah, so we have a bunch of metrics, but I would say like the financial viability of the business across like in the next like 6 to 12 months is probably, and therefore, quite a lot of ratios after that is definitely the most important. So in that sense, right, going back to what I was saying, in that sense, it's a lot more like a bank than what we are like an RBF in that sense.
Okay.
But then we have like some flavor of what happens in the West as well. But yeah, I would say financial metrics and like liquidity ratios probably are the ones that are the most important.
Okay, got it. And you also fund businesses which are there on e-commerce marketplaces.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. We finance them. So actually, if you look at e-commerce, is one of our customer acquisition channels because we finance both the buyer and or the seller on the marketplace, both on RBF and IBF. So for us, it's a great customer acquisition, and we finance the platform itself.
Oh, okay, interesting.
So that's great.
Yeah, but I've heard a lot of founders saying that debt financing should come in much later, especially for B2C, SaaS companies or B2C, consumer companies. So do you think debt financing can work for, consumer companies or B2C, SaaS companies as well?
For sure. Yeah, no, it can work. It's actually, unlike that, right? Like it's just like it's not so it's not exactly off balance sheets, but like it does not hamper your ability to raise money. Right. It does not hurt your unit economics. So no, it's a lot lighter, and that's where the success comes from, right? It's a lot easier as a process for us, like for you to be able to have an answer, unlike bank and so on. But it's also like a much better product, and it's also something that can be, if you look at us, for example, it's only good and bad time, right? So for example, if the company is going through a drop and revenues are not here, as where they were supposed to be, then we take a lower percentage, right? The goal is to stay with the company, and being able to work with them, which a bank doesn't, right? So in that sense, it's closer to an RBF. But no, definitely. As long as you have enough metrics and cohort visibility to have some kind of level of security on where the cohort's gonna behave, then I think you are ready for the kind of solutions we provide.
Got it. And again, Idris, you build a big company, which is Fletcher, and now you're building Flow 48. How do you use compensation to create a culture of ownership and accountability, especially in a early stage startup?
Interesting. So look, I think the sense of ownership is not purely driven by financial structure, right? There is quite a lot that needs to be done at the team level, but also at the CEO level, making sure that everyone is in the same team, and making sure that everyone is on the same boat, and and that the success of the company is going to benefit themselves. So I think there is quite a lot on the culture side, purely being able to share shared values and so on, which is something that is super critical. But now to go back to exactly your questions with regards to financial incentives, I think the key is, so for example, in almost none of my company have given bonuses except sales. Sales is always needs to be focused, needs to be bonus driven. Feels like the short-term retribution is really the biggest driver. It's just different, different mindsets. But at the company-wide, ESOP is critical. Look, if you look at Glovo, we had more than 60%. We had about 6,000 employees, right, back then, and more than 60%, if I remember correctly, were having ESOP. So quite a massive distributions of ESOP across the board. It does work. There is some education that needs to be done, but I think now pretty much everyone is somehow educated on these topics.
No, absolutely. And are you remotely based, because you do shuffle from Spain and Dubai, but how about the rest of the team? Are they remote?
So not really remote first, exactly. So we have our tech team that is based in Moldova, and because it's where our CTO has built his team, and we're working with the same people. And they work not remote, right? So I think that they're working about anywhere between 3 and 4 days in the office together on a weekly basis. And then the rest of the team is in Dubai, and they're working in the office pretty much around the same. So I think there is some value definitely on having some focused work at home. There is some studies about this. We know this, but there is also, post-COVID, during COVID, we realized that 100% remote is maybe not the right solution. So there has to be a solution that is, between the two. And we believe that, 2 days in the office, 3 days at home is probably the right mix, depending on the functions. But we found that it's probably the most optimal.
Got it. And, when you're looking to build a company, do you look at as building as a team or as a family when you're looking at, building the company and a team culture?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've heard, because for me, I tend to think about my founding team. So not really a family because it's tainted, but I really as a close group of friends, for lack of better words. And I come that mostly from, and I'm not saying I'm correct, but you'll see after, right? But I tend to think about this as almost my special forces team, right? Like the guys that the girls, right? Obviously, but the people we are together, and we're just in the trenches together, and working hard together. And my life depends on you, type of things, right? So I really a very strong tie. And I know that, so I would tend to say family, but then I've also read quite a lot of literature on the topic saying that being a family is probably not what the new generation wants necessarily, and then 2, the terms is probably misleading, especially when you have to downsize, and you don't downsize your family, right? Well, you have to downsize you have to go through downsizing in your company. So look, I would say that the best way for me to handle this 2 concept is probably to think it as a very SWAT team at the beginning, where you're very, very tight, and then having a diluted version of this as you grow bigger, and going more towards enterprise, or where the links do not necessarily need to be that tight.
Got it. And what do you think is the core difference between trust and safety in a company? Can you would you want to build trust but not safety for your team?
Okay, so how do you think that they go against each other? in a way, because in a safe environment, so trust promotes a safe environment, no, for you to be able to come up with ideas and failing, correct? So I see them as going mostly hand to hand, no? Or is there something I'm missing?
Yeah, I mean, would you trust them to do the job, but would you also want them to feel safe enough in the company so that they can speak and voice their voice their opinions?
Yeah, but again, I think it's not but I think both goes hand in hands, right? So probably, so I would say I'm definitely not into micromanaging. I think you don't recruit people to tell them what to do, typical. Like they should be running their own department as a startup CEO in a way, and just being accountable on results, on making sure. And I'm not here to micromanage them and making sure that they get. There's the whole difference between the whole difference. Hobbes, I think Thomas Hobbes said this, the difference between obligation of means and obligations of results. And I think at the C level, I'm not here to listen to like how difficult it is, or happy to listen to it, but you have an obligation of results, right? Make it work. We hired you to make it work, so make your own decisions. Happy to always be a sounding board to see, to think about trade-offs and how it impacts other departments, but that's your decision. You're gonna need to make calls. Because it's not fair for anyone else to make trade-offs on your behalf. You're here to make decisions. So I would say that they go hand in hand mostly. I think probably the thing the thing that makes me think, in your question is probably like the opposite. I would say the extreme would be more like the Netflix culture, where you purely judge on your results, and if you're not a high performer in the top 10%, then you're going to be fired. I think that's obviously, so for me, I'm quite against it. There is quite a level of safety that you need to have within the company for you to be able to perform. And just again, we're hiring human being and not only machine to produce. And I think as CEO, you're responsible for that too.
Interesting. And a couple of weeks back, we had the Silicon Valley Bank fiasco, but we also learned about First Republic Bank. But what scenario planning should a startup do? Should they look at opening up bank accounts only with the bigger banks, or is it okay to work with smaller banks like the Mercury and like a bank like yours? What advice would you give to upcoming startups?
Yeah, so I mean, diversification is probably something that is like important to make sure that when things become difficult, that you have a fallback plan. That's one. Two, because obviously your questions trigger both a strategic an answer at a strategic level and then a tactical level. At strategic level, I think it makes sense for you to to have like 2 accounts and so on. And mostly believe in the big banks, but big banks do fair. I know like the too big to fail is a bit of a concept, and it's true that in the US, a bit less in Europe, definitely not true in emerging markets, right? So tactically, I would have like multiple bank accounts. I think it's important. You might have problems with one bank account, as well. Like you might receive a payment from one account that has been flagged that's PEP, and then your company cannot operate all of a sudden, and then for lack of better words, you're screwed for multiple weeks until you open a bank account with another bank. So like there is quite a lot of scenarios, so especially in emerging markets, that you need to have a fallback bank on. So yeah, for us, for example, we have multiple bank accounts.
Okay, got it. And in the last couple of years, you've been strong on Middle East and that region. So, what do you think could be the reason for MENA to become a powerhouse in tech moving forward? I mean, a lot of investments are happening in Saudi Arabia, but where do you foresee in 10 years what can be done in MENA for it to be a technological powerhouse?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, obviously, it's something that governments in both UAE and Saudi Arabia, like rightfully said, is something that is super important for them. Actually, if you look at the government of Saudi Arabia, they actually announced the next unicorns. the next 20 unicorns. I don't know if you saw it. It's just like basically like these companies, you government or governmental entities, you need to work with them because we want them to be unicorns, even though some of them were fairly early stage, like Series A type of stage. So it was a great news for them, basically saying, okay, all right, we've been almost, so they can make and break unicorn for sure. And there is only a few countries that can do this, or at least there's only a few countries where it's okay to say this and to make it happen. So like, look, I think that there is definitely a lot of things that has happened already. Two, there has always been a lot of capital, right, in this part of the world. And for a long time, it was going to, funds in the West, but now you start having funds, here, and therefore betting on their own horse. I don't know if you saw the article saying that more and more funds right now from the US are coming to Saudi Arabia for LP money. And it's definitely the case, right? If you look at, funds like PIF and, these Saudi funds are massive, especially if you look at the profits, right? I think Saudi Aramco made as much profits in the first quarter as all the, Alphabet, Amazon and Apple combined in 1 year, like something like ridiculous. And we tend to completely so my point is that there is quite a lot of capital, and therefore because of the lack of development in some aspects of the economy, there is definitely will be unicorns that are coming from the region. It's just mathematical, because it's not a question of talents. Like most of the top people are educated in Europe or in the US top universities, and it's been like this for generations now. So yeah, you're definitely going to have a lot of unicorns coming from the region. I think it's probably where you're going to see as a percentage, right? Maybe but where you're going to have the most accelerations of unicorns.
Super interesting. And Idris, you've been onto your third startup as a founder. It takes a lot of courage to keep building, but you built something spectacular with Fletcher. What keeps you going to keep building? Because you are at a stage where you don't need to keep building. You could run a fund or something, but what keeps you going? Just keep building more and more.
There is something about so one is quite personal, and the other one is more general. But so for me, I think that I don't know, maybe it's how I've been brought up, but I always feel like I need to prove to myself, to the world, to the people that believe in me that that I can do it again, that it was not luck, that I can do it in a different environment, a different industry, or different geography. And I always feel like it's always this feeling that it's underachieved, that that I could have done better in other companies. You're always looking for this perfect home run in a way, probably, and until you have not done it, then you're not happy with yourself. So that's the one that is personal. Second one is probably is just fun as well, right? There is something about building a company, surrounding yourself with top talents, learning so much, being able to build something from scratch, and it's super interesting. I always remember, for example, at Fletcher, when after, so when you look at the your revenue slides, it's just what happened in the first 2 years? We did nothing or what, but then anyway, year 4 we started trading aircrafts. I remember during the peak seasons of 11/11 pretty much, right, and Christmas. So for 4 weeks we're trading 45 Boeing 747 just full of packages coming straight from China going to Saudi Arabia. And then we realized that we're doing this more than any of the other companies combined. It's just so there is something that the magnitude of what you're building is also very exciting. So yeah, I think that's, but it's also super daunting. For me, I think if I look at myself 10 years ago versus now, I think that now I realize more how much of how necessary it is for startup founders to have some distance with their own company and try to have a normal life outside of work, because it's taxing.
No, absolutely. I think startups are really fun. That's why I've had a long journey in startups, but you're absolutely right about having that sort of work and work-life balance. And I quickly want to do the top 3. What's your favorite business book?
I would say it's probably so I would say there is two. One is the story about storytelling, and I forgot the name because it's the one that I read a couple of times, just like to understand, to remind myself, on how critical it is. And then two is probably the Netflix book, actually, No Rules Rules. Like, not because I like it, but because it's how clear, it's like strategy is defining what you're gonna do, but it's even more about defining what you're not gonna do.
Yeah.
Right? It's more important. And I think when I see this is like, okay, like for me, like this is definitely what I don't want to do. I understand why it can work in some environments, but I'm not the CEO for this type of company. Nothing wrong, but I realized that this is not me. So like, I think that was probably the ones that I'm like, okay, we had very interesting discussions with the C-suite on this book, but yeah, that's probably the one.
Got it. We'll put that in the show notes. And, if you could go back in time and start building Flow 48, what is the one thing you would have focused on or done anything differently?
Probably would have, I spent a lot of time at the beginning talking to debt providers, because obviously to grow this kind of business, you need to have debt and equity. We had equity, and we tried to grow very fast by talking to debt providers early on. You cannot talk to debt providers until you have a track record. It's just a waste of time, a waste of energy, and therefore a waste of focus. You need to wait. We wanted to go a little bit too far, too quick, too fast, too quickly, right?
Got it. And what's your favorite online tool? For example, Gmail, Slack, Zoom.
I mean, I'm on Zoom all day. Yeah, so Zoom, and I love the story too. So Zoom, like the founder of Zoom is an Endeavor entrepreneur, and he said this. I'm a big Endeavor fan, and he said the story about how he built this company, and honestly, is just like one of the best story ever. So for those who haven't seen the story, who haven't heard him talk, it's amazing how much he built that. So yeah, Zoom.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Zoom is also one of my favorite products. We'll put that in the show notes. Then Idriss, what is the best way people can reach out to you and know more about Flow 48?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, happy you can find me on LinkedIn. It's probably where I'm the most quite active there. So yeah, happy to help, obviously.
Got it. We'll put that in the show notes. Idriss, thank you so much for taking your time and speaking to us. I really enjoyed my conversation with you.
Thanks a lot, Rohit. Pleasure.